Picture this. You're a woman in ancient Rome. It's the year 60 AD, and something is happening to your body that happens every single month. No pharmacy, no pad, no pain reliever. And around you, scholars are actually writing, in serious published texts, that your body can wilt flowers, curdle wine, kill bees, and strip metal of its shine just by being near it. And somehow, despite all of that, you figure it out. You manage. You survive. And you pass down what you know to every woman who comes after you. That is the hidden history of the period. And it is far more fascinating than anyone told you. Here's the uncomfortable truth about ancient history. The people who wrote it down were almost always men. And most of those men had exactly zero interest in documenting what half the population experienced every single month. Open any history book from antiquity. You'll find pages on battle tactics, trade routes, philosophy, architecture. You will not find, and here is how an ordinary Roman woman handled her period for 30 years of her life. But here's what's remarkable. Archaeology doesn't care about embarrassment. And in the past few decades, researchers have started finding the evidence in ancient trash heaps, in medical papyri buried for thousands of years, in the remnants of cloth found in Egyptian tombs, in oral traditions that survived centuries of deliberate erasure. And what they found changes the story completely. The oldest physical evidence we have comes from ancient Egypt, around 3000 BCE. Women used softened papyrus rolls and folded linen cloth. The Ebers Papyrus, and one of the oldest medical documents on Earth, written around 1550 BCE, contains specific remedies for what we would now recognize as menstrual cramps. Egyptian women didn't just manage their periods, they had a medical system for it. In ancient China during the Han Dynasty, archaeological evidence points to folded silk pads held in place with cloth belts. Silk, oh what? Because it was soft. Because it was washable. Because someone had thought this through with extraordinary care over centuries of refinement. And in the Americas, indigenous communities across dozens of cultures used sphagnum moss. Modern laboratory testing has confirmed that sphagnum moss is actually more absorbent than cotton and naturally antibacterial. These women weren't experimenting randomly. They were observing, testing, refining, practicing what we would now call applied science, without ever getting credit for it. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because for most of written history, we're taught that menstruation was considered shameful, dirty, taboo, and that is true in some cultures at some times. But it is not the whole story. For many early civilizations, particularly those in sub-Saharan Africa, parts of the ancient Near East, and among many indigenous American cultures, menstrual blood was not feared. It was sacred, it was powerful, and it was treated accordingly. In several early agricultural societies, menstrual blood was associated with fertility itself. The same force that created new life inside the body must have cosmic significance. Some ancient shrines show evidence of ritual involving blood offerings, and researchers now believe at least some of these involved menstrual blood specifically. Among the Apache people of North America, a girl's first period was cause for a multi-day ceremony. The sunrise ceremony continues today. The girl symbolically becomes changing woman, one of the most important figures in Apache spiritual tradition. Not hidden, not shameful, celebrated as a profound and sacred transformation. Among the Yurok people of Northern California, menstruating women would gather separately from the rest of the community. But this was not punishment. In Yurok tradition, a woman during her period was at the peak of her spiritual power. The separation was meant to concentrate and preserve that power, not to suppress or punish the woman who had it. And in certain early Vedic traditions in ancient India, some texts describe menstrual blood as connected to the goddess Shakti, raw, transformative, creative energy. The association of menstruation with impurity came later, as different power structures replaced the older traditions that had come before them. So what happened? Why did so many cultures shift from reverence to fear? It's a slow shift. It happens over centuries. And it follows a pattern that researchers have identified across wildly different civilizations. As societies become more hierarchical, more organized around male religious authority, menstruation becomes dangerous. Not dangerous to the woman experiencing it. Dangerous, supposedly, to everything around her. Pliny the Elder, the Roman scholar, wrote in the 1st century AD that a menstruating woman could sour new wine, dry out crops, dull the edge of iron blades, dim mirrors with her gaze, cause bees to abandon their hives, and make dogs go rabid if they tasted the blood. He wrote this as natural philosophy, as scientific fact, in a text that was considered authoritative for over 1,000 years after his death. In ancient Jewish law, a menstruating woman was niddah, ritually impure. She could not touch her husband, sit on furniture others would use, or prepare food. Ritual separation lasted 7 days after the period ended, followed by immersion in a ritual bath before contact could resume. Similar rules appeared in Zoroastrian texts, in certain Hindu traditions, and in many traditional communities across the ancient world. Across radically different religions in different parts of the world, century after century, the same conclusion. The menstruating body is to be separated. The result? Women spent enormous portions of their adult lives navigating a world that classified their bodies as temporarily off-limits. And they did it while also being responsible for cooking, farming, raising children, and keeping entire households and communities functioning without interruption. The taboo didn't stop women from functioning. It just made everything significantly harder. Here's the piece of this story that almost never gets told. Because when women were isolated, whether in menstrual huts, in separate rooms, or in designated spaces, something else happened alongside the separation. They talked to each other. The menstrual hut has been treated in popular history as a punishment, a quarantine, evidence of how brutally women were controlled. And sometimes it was exactly that. But researchers studying oral traditions in many cultures have found something more complicated. The gathering space, whatever it was called, frequently functioned as a repository of knowledge. Women shared medical information there, herbal remedies, knowledge about pregnancy, about childbirth, about managing pain, about treating infections, knowledge that the men in their communities did not have access to and often didn't know existed. In ancient Egypt, specific herbs were routinely used for menstrual discomfort. Blue lotus, which has mild analgesic properties, and fenugreek, which has confirmed anti-inflammatory effects, appear in multiple medical papyri in the context of women's health. This knowledge was passed from women to women across dozens of generations. In medieval Europe, women worked with plants including tansy, mugwort, and shepherd's purse for menstrual regulation. Modern pharmacology has confirmed that some of these plants do have measurable effects on uterine activity. Women weren't practicing superstition. They were practicing proto-pharmacy. In the dark, without credit. Sometimes under direct threat of being accused of witchcraft for knowing too much. In West African communities, complex oral traditions around women's medicine survived for centuries, detailing specific plants for specific symptoms, timing, dosing, preparation methods. Much of this knowledge was deliberately suppressed and destroyed during the colonial period. What survived in fragments suggests a medical tradition of extraordinary depth and sophistication. For most of human history, women's period management required constant improvisation. Cloth, linen, papyrus, wool, moss, sea sponges along the Mediterranean coast. Whatever was available and soft and absorbent. The technological shift came, of all places, from a war. During the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and 1871, military nurses on the French side noticed something about the cellulose bandaging material being used for wounded soldiers. It was remarkably absorbent, far more than linen. Some of these nurses began repurposing leftover dressings for their own use during their periods. Practical problem, practical solution. The same formula that had driven women's ingenuity for thousands of years. This observation traveled slowly through the medical community. By the 1880s and 1890s, the first commercial menstrual pads began appearing in Europe and America. They were made of disposable cellulose. They worked. There was just one problem. The taboo was so deeply embedded that women couldn't talk about them, even when buying them. Pharmacies stocked the products. Women desperately wanted them. But walking up to a male pharmacist in the Victorian era and asking for menstrual products was considered too embarrassing to do out loud. Sales were initially dismal. Kimberly-Clark solved this in 1920 with a quietly brilliant move. They placed boxes of their Kotex pads at pharmacy counters with a coin box next to them. Women could leave money and take the product without speaking to anyone, without making eye contact, without having the conversation that centuries of taboo had made feel impossible. The products sold out immediately, not because the technology was revolutionary, because the distribution method respected the silence that history had forced on women for thousands of years. Let's sit with this for a moment, because the full picture here is genuinely staggering. for at least 35,000 years, which is our earliest estimated date for modern human behavioral patterns. Half of the human population has been managing this experience. Quietly, creatively, often in secret. They were solving practical problems with whatever materials they had available. They were building medical traditions and preserving knowledge under conditions of extreme social pressure. They were navigating rules that classified their bodies as dangerous while simultaneously being expected to hold their communities together. And almost none of this was written down. Almost none of it made it into the official historical record that we inherited. The sphagnum moss, the silk pads, the blue lotus tea, the herbal traditions passed in whispers in gathering spaces where men were not welcome. The pharmacy coin boxes where you could take what you needed without speaking. Every one of these is a small monument to human ingenuity under constraint. History keeps hiding this stuff, but it keeps getting found. And maybe that is the point. Some things are too practical, too universal, too deeply human to stay buried forever. If you found this as fascinating as I do, and I hope you did, subscribe. There's a lot more hidden history where this came from.